Hey guys, now we're going to do section 228 of the Nietzsche reading, which means we're going to look at how Nietzsche differentiated between different types of morality for different types of people, depending on where they were in this hierarchy of greatness. So that means we need to look at names, definitions, and interrelate them. We also need to explore what types of morality were appropriate for who, according to Nietzsche, and then look at a morality that would be detrimental for the so-called higher men, which would be a precursor to the Übermensch. So could you quickly write these all down, score them, and then move ahead and draw a man sitting on top of a mountain, and that'll become apparent when you see the visual summary. Cheers. All right, Nietzsche starts this section off by telling us that in the past, all kind of moral philosophy has been boring and soporific. If you don't know what soporific means, it means makes you want to fall asleep. So take a note. And logically, anyone who advocates for this kind of moral philosophy and then bases a system of virtue on it is also going to create a boring set of virtues. Take a note. He then says that any attempt to generate a system of morality which is based on solving the problems of society is going to be a threat or a danger to humanity. And this is because obviously what you're doing is you're going to create some kind of life negation or some system which actually suppresses key aspects of what it means to be human. So he would argue that this is even immoral. Ironically, he says that focusing on the generation of a key of morality for the slaves is kind of immoral. So, just think about that. And when I say for the slaves, I mean made by the slaves for everybody else, but obviously it's a slave type of morality. Take a note. Yet this is something that obviously traditional Christianity during Nietzsche's time has failed to understand. He believes that tired, exhausted philosophies that have tried to argue the same principles apply to everybody and that aspire to happiness are just not going to work because they don't understand this one basic idea, which is that one single principle cannot be the right thing for everyone and it cannot make everyone happy. There are different things that are right for different people, and vice versa. Different things make different people happy. Take a note. And this is because it all depends on where you are in the hierarchy. If you're higher in the hierarchy, you have a different set of rights or wrongs or morals. Whereas people who are low in the hierarchy, again, have a different set of morality. And he believes then that obviously if you are the higher man, there's our man sitting on the mountain, the ideals and values of what is meant to be a moral system for people lower in the hierarchy are going to be detrimental and lead to the decay of that person. Take a note. So let's start reading. May you be forgiven for the discovery that all moral philosophy hitherto, in the past, has been boring and soporific, and what virtue has, in my eyes, been harmed by nothing more than it has been by its boringness of its advocates. In saying which, however, I should not want to overlook their general utility. So he's saying the general utility of the virtues. Let's read and find out. It is important that as few people as possible should think about morality. So he thinks not many people should think about it. It's dangerous if they do. Consequently, it's very important that morality should not one day become interesting. He's saying it's even more important that it doesn't become interesting. Okay, that's fascinating because he's getting us to think about it. Then he says, but don't worry, it is still now as it always has been. So he's saying it's still boring. I see no one in Europe who has or propagates an idea that thinking about morality could be dangerous, insidious, seductive, that fatality could be involved. Do you think he's being ironic here? I mean, he's writing this book called Beyond Good and Evil, which is an analysis of the genealogy of morality, and it does tend to be insidious, seductive, and in some ways it could be deadly for some people. I think he's taking the mickey. Consider, for example, the indefatigable, inevitable English utilitarians with what clumsy and worthy feet they walk, stalk. A Homeric metaphor says it more plainly. Along the footsteps of Bentham. Remember Jeremy Bentham, the guy we studied before, who developed a simple utilitarianism based on pleasures and pains? Just as he himself had walked the footsteps of the worthy Helveticus. So Bentham had walked the steps of this Helveticus. Just take a note that he's basically dismissing Bentham for now. All right, so really I got his name wrong. It's not Helveticus, it's Helvetius. And basically this was a man who was considered basically human phenomena to be physical. Obviously that means that you would relate your philosophy to pleasure and pain. So that's all he's doing. He's just dismissing this guy who was an important influence on Bentham. No new idea, no subtle expression or turn of an old idea, not even a real history of what had been thought before. An impossible literature altogether unless one knows how to leaven it with a little malice. So he's trying to say, how can someone write good philosophy that might just be a little malicious and a little mean? I think he's talking about himself. Just saying. Just saying. For into these moralists too, whom one has read with mental reservations of one has to read them at all, if one has to read them at all, there has crept an old English vice called can't, which means you can't do something. He reckons that this idea of can't is moving into modern moralism these days. Take a note. Which is moral tartuffery. Wow. Moral tartuffery. Let's look that up. Just wait for a second. Okay, now remember that Nietzsche was a huge studier of the ancient Greek plays and of literature in general, and Tartuffe was an imposter in a 1600s play. So tartuffery would mean that you're being an imposter, and he's saying this idea of can't or not being able to do things is moral tartuffery. It's moral imposterism or pretending. This time concealed in a new form of scientificality. Wow, scientificality. There are also signs. So that's what he's basically. Is he accusing? I think he might be. He's accusing these moralists of using science to create moral imposters. There are also signs of a secret struggle with pangs of conscience, from which a race of former Puritans will naturally suffer. So he's saying, oh, pangs of conscience is what Puritans tend to basically go through. Is a moralist not the opposite of a Puritan? That is to say, a thinker who regards morality as something questionable, as worthy of question marks, in short, as a problem? Is moralizing not immoral? So what he's saying basically here is moralism is moral because it questions morality. Isn't that bizarre? Ultimately, they all want English morality to prevail inasmuch as mankind or the general utility, which means general use, or the happiness of the greater number. No, the happiness of England would best be served. They would like with all their might to prove to themselves that to strive after English happiness, I mean after comfort and fashion, so he doesn't really think it's happiness, and as the supreme goal, a seat in Parliament, so he's bagging again democracy, is at the same time the true path to virtue. Indeed, that all virtue there has ever been on earth has consisted in just such a striving for these, what he would argue are quite banal little ends. Take a note. Not one of these ponderous herd animals with their uneasy conscience. So he's saying, have an uneasy conscience. You start thinking about moral questions, you start questioning them. In short, it's a problem. Not one of these herd animals, right, with their uneasy conscience, who undertake to advocate the cause of egoism as the cause of the general welfare. So really, that's, again, remember the Marxists, oh, we didn't cover that, we covered that with a different class. Egoism is false individualism. So these people who have a guilty conscience, who are trying to look at some kind of pseudo-individualism and confuse that with general welfare, wants to know or scent that the general welfare is not an ideal or a goal or a concept that can be grasped at all, but only an emetic. That which is right for one cannot by any means therefore be right for another, and that the demand of one morality for all is detrimental to precisely the higher men. In short, that there exists an order of rank between man and man, consequently also between morality and morality. Here he basically says it, right? So it's a lie to basically say that we have this goal, this idea of general welfare. You're trying to reduce morality to one principle. That's a lie. That can't apply to every single man in this hierarchy, which is what the order of rank is. Okay, and he's really bagging the utilitarians, but he's also bagging all other kind of contemporary morality that's arising at the time that tries to come across as scientific and objective, which says that it's trying to approach the general welfare, but really it's just looking at what's there for the false individual. And it just can't fit. It can't fit everybody on the hierarchy. Take a note. There are modest and thoroughly mediocre species of man. So he's saying there are people who are modest and thoroughly average species of man. These English utilitarians who he's bagging, people like Bentham, and as Uffa said, insofar as they are boring, one cannot think sufficiently highly of their utility, so they're not useful to him. Or one thought even so to encourage them, which is in part the objective of the following rhymes. Hail, continue plodders, hail. People who plod are people who walk slowly, lengthen out the tedious tale. Pedants still in head and knee, dull of humour or not a tree, permanently commonplace, and then something in Latin. So what he's doing really, it's an attack on basically utilitarians, and the reason why he refers to Parliament up here is because obviously, utilitarianism was a little bit of a reformist movement. It was trying to say we need to find scientific ways of measuring happiness and then deciding what is right or wrong. And and then it equates the individual interest as something that can add up across all of society. And once it adds up, you're going to find that whatever produces the most good for society is basically what every individual would argue is good. You kind of get it. And that therefore is compatible with democracy, because democracy and parliament allows us to pursue, from a utilitarian point of view, the ideal happiness, because we've got people representing us who knows what's going to produce some kind of pleasure. And he's saying this is just boring, and it ignores the fact that this idea of pursuing general welfare is just stupid. It's stupid because not everybody is in that general group. People have different groups. People are different on the hierarchy, therefore they require a different kind of morality, a different moral system, depending on where they are. So we said we would look at the differentiation that he talked about. He primarily aimed it at some of the fallacies he believed exist in utilitarianism. We looked at and interrelated key terms. We explored different types of morality, and we explored what type of morality was detrimental. He said basically this idea of pursuing the general welfare, pursuing what the herd would require to make everybody happy. He's saying this would be detrimental to higher men because they have a different morality, a different calling. All right, so if you get all that, you know that you are around about a 4. If you don't get it, well, then you need to come back and ask me lots of questions. Cheers.